Hi, everyone, and welcome to this launch of Stephen Ross Smith's new book of fiction, Glimmer. I'm Jeanette Lynes from the University of Saskatchewan, and I'd first like to thank Radiant Press and John and Deborah for inviting me to be part of this virtual book launch. Radiant Press, situated in beautiful Regina on Treaty 4 territory. And I'm delighted today to talk with Stephen Ross Smith, who I know better as Steve, Steve, about your really wonderful new book of short stories, Glimmer. So let's get started. And just to make some general comments, maybe I've had a sneak preview of the book that some viewers out there have not had. This is just a really terrific collection of short stories, and you are in for a treat. I know Stephen as a poet, probably mainly from the Fluttertongue series, which is awesome. But this Glimmer is his third book of fiction, so you might not know that. And I'm so glad that to have these stories. And I just Steve, I hope you keep going. And I'm waiting for that one sentence, that novel written as one sentence. So it's a wonderful book of stories. Really some great flash, really short stories written as one sentence. Spoiler, longer stories, such a poet's attentiveness to craft and language here, and inventive thinking, and just so many memorable images and moments that we will get to when we discuss the book. So Steve, just for openers, can you tell us kind of the genesis of the book and how it came together? I know some of the stories have been published, and we'd love to. It's always fun to hear the story of the book.
Sure. Hi. Thanks, Jeanette, for that generous introduction. And yes, the genesis of the whole book. There were two genocide. Anyway, there were two beginnings. One was that I've had two books of fiction published, one in the 80s, one in the 90s. And when I did that, I thought, oh, well, I guess I'll do one collection of short fiction every decade. But somehow a few decades disappeared on me. But when I had the opportunity, in the late 2000s, I guess it was about 2014, 2015. I thought, oh yeah, maybe it's time for me to see if I can still write a story. And I thought maybe I can actually write like traditional, or whatever you want to call them, traditional stories, or some linear short stories. Well, my mind is a little bit too perverse to allow me to go on that linear path for too long. But I did start writing a story, and if I'm not mistaken, this was the first. What I'm going to read is from what was the first story, but it changed considerably over a number of years. Maybe I'll just read this story, and because we can talk about some other items of interest that I had in crafting these.
That's great. We'd love to hear a sample from the new book.
Okay, well, this is just the opening to the story called Inconcinity. Lester looks up from reading. He squirms in his fold-up canvas chair, slips his feet into his sandals, gets up and walks to the edge of the water and wades in up to his knees. Chilly. He squints, presses his straw hat firmly on his head, and dives, hat, sunglasses, shorts, sandals, book and all. His nose scrapes the bottom sand, popping his eyes wide open. Tiny fish dart ahead, spring out of view. The buoyancy and the cold bite of the ocean water jolt Lester to the surface. He gains his footing, splutters, grabs his sinking sunglasses, his book, and his floating hat, reaches down for his half-submerged sandals, and he sloshes as fast as he can toward the shore. Trembling, he wince steps, pebbles and shells jabbing the soles of his bare feet, to his chair, drops his belongings to the sand, grabs his towel, and yanks it around his shoulders. With sandals back on and squishy, he paces in the June afternoon sun, its warmth inching through, easing his shivers. Lester squints across the strait toward Mount Baker, poking above a ribbon of pollution against the pale blue sky. His eyes are watery. The view bubbles. He feels inside and outside his head at the same time. Remember our island holiday? Natalie asked as she was weakening. I wish I could go back. Yes, it was. Maybe you'd go there for me after, her voice a whisper. I can imagine you there. I remember us, happy. A chill seemed to come from the overhead vent. Beside their VW camper with its new avocado green paint job, he and Natalie had sipped margaritas and barbecued steaks and watched the spectacular sunsets over the bay, the fiery reflections on the clouds, the sky mauve and rich blue darkening and whispering of infinity. They'd loved it. It was one of their better times, maybe their best. In the room, with its blipping monitor and sterile light, Lester felt far from that idol. Natalie exhaled and closed her eyes. Lester took her hand. It felt warmer than his. A slight smile formed on her lips. He wasn't sure he'd want to go back alone. Lester eases his grip on the towel, pacing, warming, and he glances out over the channel. It catches a corner of his vision. He stands still, directing his focus beyond the curved beach to a distant edge of the island. At it, a black lump punctuating the sky, disproportionate, sitting on top of a tall, skinny protrusion. He stares, perplexed. I'm on permanent vacation, staring at a lump. So that's the beginning of Inconcinity, and the story goes on to include other stories with two other characters, and it leaps around in time, and it exemplifies one of the things that I was interested in, which is story within story. So ways of interrupting whatever it is, a scene, a present, a moment with another scene or present or moment, and making that into a kind of a weaving. And yeah, some interesting things happen as we go into the story. Lester has some, maybe emotional epiphanies and a bit of fun.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. I think that's a really nice introduction to readers to your collection. And that is a poignant, beautiful story. And full disclosure, I had to look up the word inconcinity in the dictionary, and I love that. And that's, I just know that's the kind of mischievous poet side of you coming out there. I thought, what an interesting word. And I sort of thought, how do you pronounce it? And I tried different ways, and I looked it up, and what a cool word, a new cool word that I learned means something unsuitable or incongruous. And it is a wonderful story, and with a real undertone of sadness and sorrow, as some of these stories do have quite serious themes of loss, but wonderful characters. And in that same story, I'm pretty sure Lester meets up with pretty cool musician dude named Kenton, who's like quoting philosophy while he's smoking a joint. So yeah, there's really delightful characters in these stories of different ages as well. It was nice to see that range, and quite a few, maybe not surprisingly, quite a few artist figure characters, musicians and painters, characters in theater. There's a woodworker in one of the stories. So I just love Samuel Beckett, I think, makes kind of a cameo appearance in Saskatoon in one of the stories.
Yeah.
I love the range of characters, Stephen. I wondered if you cared to comment on how you, what do you, people always want to know, are these real people, or are they all made up, or are they composites? If you wanted to share some of the characterization is so strong in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I'm not really a fiction writer. And I mean, maybe I am, I don't know. I don't think of myself as a fiction writer. But then when I started to write these pieces, people came to me. It's a varied process how these things pop into your head and and eventually into your stories. But I did think that, or I guess I realized along the way that, yeah, you got these characters. If you're going to have a character, they should be a character. Although in the next piece that I'm going to read, you'll hear a reference to character, which maybe belies what I'm saying. But you mentioned that there are a lot of references to artists and music and whatever. Actually, every story of the longer stories, we have to talk about the shorter ones, but every story of the longer stories has references to music in the book. And in fact, at the end of the book, there's a playlist. So the music, like, as in a film, where at the end, you see all those music credits. Well, my book has one of those at the end, a playlist. So people can, find the music and, I don't know, play it along with reading the book, I suppose.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, the book is suffused with music, Bob Marley, Bob Dylan, Buddy Guy, all kinds of great things. And to sort of circle back then, stories within stories, and we will get to the shorter stories as well. It's so interesting what you do with time in a lot of these stories, I thought too, like a couple of stories I think explore like simultaneity, like different things that are happening at the same time, like somebody's dying while someone is being born, or a couple is in limbo and while a church is burning. And it's very, very interesting what the treatment of time in some of these stories, and the stories, and then just the structure of the stories, like the stories within stories, like the interpolated stories. That must be, I can't write short stories, so that must be quite challenging to weave all that together, and just admired the structure of these stories a lot, if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, no, I think structure is important to me. And I think it probably comes from my background as a poet, where I'm interested in poetry and disjunction and interweaving, because I think of in our lives are made up of a combination of simultaneity and what would be the other, individuality, I suppose you could say. So while I'm doing this right now, say, there are a gazillion other things going on in the world. There are people that I know, people that I love, who are having completely different states than I'm having right now. And somehow that notion interests me, that, I mean, can't get everybody's story into one story, but that simultaneity is a part of life. And so I think that's part of what interests me in leaping time and weaving different narratives together and stories within stories. Probably one good, there are a couple of good examples of that in the book, but one is a story called 2344, and there's another one, what's it called? I think it's called, I've just gone blank on what it's called, but where it tells different people's stories woven through, or even as separate chunks through the story. Yeah. So that sort of thing interests me. I think what I like to do when I'm writing a story is to think about how I can come at the story not through a conventional doorway, or even if I come in through a conventional doorway, that I shake it up. And that's really just to interest me, because otherwise I'm liable to get bored. And so this is a way I work against my own boredom, I suppose, is to try and think of new ways to get into a story, new ways to weave a story, how a character can become alive, because there's no formula. It's not enough to describe their attire or just to have them talk. Also, I'm interested in stories where there is dialogue, but the story doesn't rely on dialogue totally. It has other things propelling it. So anyway, there are many things that go on in my head while I'm trying to craft the story, I guess.
Yeah, and I do. We do want to hear some more of it. I'm glad that you mentioned dialogue, and just to pick up on what you just said. One of the things I love about the book is this blend of, I mean, overall, as much as these labels are applied and, you know, are useful, I would say this is a collection of experimental fiction. And I do love the blend with some of the more experimental pieces, like the one sentence stories and the, I don't know what the word is, I guess more like what we're accustomed to with short stories. I think that blend is really, really nice. And I was really struck by your dialogue, use of dialogue too, Steve. Like it's you got such that good ear, you know, of a poet. And sometimes the dialogue just borderline kind of absurd. It kind of has a Samuel Beckett kind of weirdness to it. Like, I don't know which, I think it's in Fault Lines and Stars. I know, I don't know, but you do know. I'm trying to know. I thought, oh, I'm having a waiting for Godot moment here. So, before you read another, we'd love to hear some more. I wondered if you wanted to. Do you just, you know, they used to say, sit around in a coffee shop and eavesdrop and write down, and this is how you learn to write dialogue for the aspiring writers out there. But is that, you know, coming from poetry especially, is that something that you enjoyed working through the dialogue? It's really strong.
Yeah, I guess I do think I write with an ear, and I can't, like, I don't, you know, I'm not really great at that trick of sitting in a coffee shop and listening to people and jotting it down, although you can hardly be in a coffee shop without listening to people. But no, I think I write with an ear, and I guess in my dialogue, perhaps that comes through. And I also I like, well, that story that you mentioned, Fault Lines and Stars. I like that story came to me with a tone, and I like the way the dialogue, like nothing is quite conclusive in it. Like it's kind of, I don't know what it is. It's kind of cloudy dialogue or something. It's these two people they're talking to each other and saying really meaningful things, but it's not with that. It's not, I don't know how to describe it. It's not with that clarity of thought. It's with a little bit of cloudy thought. And
I thought that off-kilter nature of it was actually really captured the way we often just do talk, you know, in real life. I really enjoyed it. I want to ask too about the flash pieces, the one sentence stories, but I'm kind of have an appetite to hear another sample from the book, if you'd care to.
Sure, and you're speaking of something not the one sentence novels, because I would like to read the one sentence novel too, but we can squeeze in a couple of pieces maybe, eh?
Great, yes.
All right, well, I will then. I referred to, I mean, I would like to read from Fault Lines and Stars as well, but you know, this is a short launch. People can, you know, get the book and find out what the heck we're talking about. But I will read from 2344, which really you'll see is stories within or aside stories. Summer solstice. In the Northern Hemisphere, it happens between June 20 and 22nd, when the North Pole is most inclined toward the sun. The Earth's tilt brings the longest day and great light and warmth to everyone above the equator. It gives rise to gatherings and celebrations, festivals and rituals. It is said to be a special and spiritual day, and that mystical forces may be unleashed. The effects of the changing angle are felt by all, each in his or her own way. For a few seconds, everything hangs in the balance, and then Roger and Maggie. We love to play pirate, Roger calls as he hops in and pushes the canoe away from the dock. His partner sits silent and light in the front of the canoe, facing him and the rippling water and the far shore. A pirate hat on her head, her back to the casual observers sunning themselves on the benches by the dock. Avast me hearties, he shouts, and a few wave in return as he strokes to back up, then turn the canoe into a gradual sweep toward the open water. One voice calls out from on shore, "Bon voyage." He salutes, and as the canoe arcs, his passenger gazes past him to the watchers. Her expression is placid, serene. The skin of her bare arms poking from a powder blue life jacket is smooth, unblemished, her forearms lifting slightly in her version of a wave, and a response to the gentle breeze whispering across the lake. Roger's strong hands clutch the paddle, and his muscular arms stroke and propel the canoe ahead, brushing his orange vest with a rhythmic rustle. To his companion, he says softly, "We're launched, Maggie May." He winks and admires the way her black hat tips jauntily to one side, just the way he'd said it. It's a special day. The solstice will just feel like another ruffle in the water. Her head dips forward in a small nod. Roger turns his glance to the middle of the lake, savoring the tranquil ambience, the chuff of water against the bow, the rhythmic splash of the paddle, the water's mineral smell, and the steady course guided by his adept strokes. Martin, Vicky, and Kate. Martin remembers. It was that time Vicky up against the maple tree in the creek valley out behind her parents' house that was the start of Martin's back problems. It was dark, the ground uneven, and Vicky was elevated, her legs around his hips. Awkward. As he thrusted, his eyes lifted from the faint reddish glow of her hair to the June moon, a slivered crescent filtering through the branches overhead. He can almost feel it now, the guttural exhale that rose from his throat toward that moon. But that was decades ago, 3 to be exact, 30 years ago to the day that Vicky had insisted on a solstice conjugation, claiming unity with cosmic forces. Today, his back is killing him. Any movement causes pain. After 30 minutes sitting on the couch watching the news, he tries tentatively to stand up, pushing his hands against the soft cushion and falling back, his attention returning to the newscast, its bleak messages, the questions it raises in him. Are humans incapable of peaceful existence? Pain jabs in his back as he tries to stand again. Oh, Vicky. Oh, Martin, fuck me, she'd squealed as he held her thighs and pushed her against the bark. Harder. Their panting was louder than the gurgling stream beside them. How, from their brief, intense love, she inhabits him after all these years. Meanwhile, the pain pills have upset his stomach too. Take them with food, the pharmacist had said. He'd ignored that, took them in the middle of the night when he got up to pee. He wonders now if his stomach is ever empty. Rarely in this country, he thinks, which is not the case everywhere in the world. It's all in the news. The world is fucked, everything off kilter. He's gotten up and shuffles stiffly to the phone, his torso tilting to the right. He auto-dials the massage clinic. Jocelyn is off today, says the receptionist, but we have a cancellation with a new massage therapist, Kate. She's very good. Must be my solstice luck, he says. Pencil me in, thinking, amidst all the bad news, maybe healing forces are at play.
Oh, thank you, Steve, for that. I love how that story toggles between these different characters, and you're definitely got us immersed in the world of Canadiana. Be careful what happens out in the woods, right? And in those canoes. So we're gonna chat a little bit about the short stories, but I just have to get it in. Favorite simile in the whole book, eating corn is like typing.
Oh,
That's fantastic. And I was thinking again, that's Victor Schlavsky's defamiliarization, right? Who I've never would have thought of it that way. So a lot of the stories tilt a lens and and we see things different ways. And I think the book also just invites us to think about what a story is. And some of the several stories you do, you go meta, and you have the you break the fourth wall, right? Where suddenly the author will step into the story, like metafiction, right? And in one story, the author is tempted to end the story here. So as a reader, I'm thinking, no, you can't do that. So very playful, fun explorations of really what a story is, and encouraging us to think about what a story is. And I would be remiss to not mention humor and play. We sure need pleasure and humor and play at this point in time. And of course, buy this book. And Bomber, you're gonna love Bomber. Maybe it's just my weird taste. It's a man about a man obsessed with the correct use of apostrophes. And the scary thing is, I could really relate to it. Maybe it's because I'm a writing teacher, but it's such a lively, fun collection of stories, balanced with some more serious stories, fantastic characters, and these short stories, each story comprised of one sentence. And I marvel at that. That's got to be, I know that some other experimental writers have done this, like Calvino and Lucy Elm, the woman who just wrote Ducks, which won a huge, that's a 1,000-page novel. Apparently that's one sentence. I can't even believe it. But to write a short story just of one sentence, Steve, that's got to be really, really a tough kind of endeavor. Can you talk about the short pieces?
Yes, I will. All that I'll say, because I'm going to read one piece. I hope we can squeeze one piece in that says a lot about the genesis of this. But it was a result of me reading a quote by someone who will be referred to in this story that set a challenge, I guess, in a sense of could a person write a one-sentence story? And so I thought, well, that's an interesting challenge. So I set out to do it. This was a couple of decades ago, and I eventually wrote 50 of them, and they range from very short, like maybe 20-word story, to one that I'm going to read, which is about one of the longer ones, and they're one sentence, and I call them one-sentence novels for people on the go. And it was kind of a bit of a jokey thing too, because we're always rushing around, right? So people could read these and not waste too much time. So, there was that. And that does relate to what you said earlier about all the stories. I think I like to walk the line between the serious and the humorous and the bizarre. So, I like to have challenges anyway. So how about if I read this one-sentence novel that really explains more or less the genesis of that idea?
Great.
It's called Homage. The author, well, maybe that's too pretentious a term, so let's replace it with writer and start over with the writer sat down to answer Italo Calvino's request for, quote, tales consisting of one sentence only or a single line. And the writer found himself having fun with the concept and generated a considerable number of such tales, aiming for 50, or as Spike Lee says in Mo Better Blues, 50, which he says as the character Giant the gambler and manager, who always seems to be wearing clothes too big for him and who gets brutally beat up near the end, but otherwise has no role in this story. And by that, I mean this one right here. So back to the main narrative thrust, and to reiterate, the writer of one-sentence novels found himself having so much fun that he began to consider the relevance of such work in the context of the great canon of English language literary novels, fearing that he was not being serious enough to be doing great work, but also thinking that somewhere along the way, even if the writers, authors of famous, dark, and serious works must have had some fun playing with ideas and rendering them into challenging syntax, since, after all, nobody wants to read prose that is boringly structured and totally predictable. And why shouldn't a writer, even if he wants to or doesn't want to be an author, have fun and not address the great themes such as tragedy and betrayal and so on, but rather wants to give the reader a series of light and or deep escapades in reading just to shake up his or her adventure amidst the lines of words. And that might even initiate challenges and different expectations in the reader from the usual, and yet still provide a kind of unfolding, which we might even call plot. And so the writer begins and struggles to keep that narrative flow, in this case, with only one character, though others are referred to, if not developed, as fully fleshed entities. For example, the reader, other writers, authors, and so on. Though in writing seminars, one is always reminded that characters have to live and breathe and be visible to the reader. So this author will give concession to that principle and say that as he writes, he is wearing blue work pants and a green merino long sleeve lightweight sweater under a black T-shirt from the Gallery of Modern Art, Glasgow, and is seated and not in any kind of action or crisis other than typing to deal with the rush of words without bringing the sentence to a close in the hopes of satisfying Italo Calvino, who, though dead, is obviously a character too in this narrative, the writer remembering pictures of him with a high forehead due to balding, but with sufficient dark hair on the sides to appear distinguished and intellectual and even authorial, though the writer wonders if this narrative is the kind of tale Calvino was looking for. And what if Italo, if the writer may address him so personally, had seen these stories, each and every one made of one sentence, and in some cases of just a single line, what Calvino would have thought, and would he have edited these or just enjoyed their reach? And might he have ever thought he would be in a story with Spike Lee, who was 34 years his junior, and with a writer who is now 8 years older than Calvino was when he died, this writer who may or may not have been to Glasgow, but who has responded to Calvino's wish, but of course, too late.
Bravo. Thank you so much, Steve. Can you read it for us now with not taking any breath? Just no, I'm kidding. One breath, one sentence. I'm going to assign that to my writing students, and maybe in an assignment for them, a challenge for them to write a story with of just one sentence. But those are that's a real tour de force, and all of those one sentence stories are. I think, thank you for reading that for us. I think we're probably winding down on time, but I did have, if I could ask you one final question. You know, it's been quite a 2.5 years for everybody, and one of the stories it is well, not a pandemic story, but takes place during the pandemic, and you know, explores again these questions about art and also human relationships. There's a production of a Beckett play that happens over Zoom, and the narrator sort of reflects upon that whole notion of, you know, actor already wearing a mask, and then another layer of distancing through mediated technology. And there's a kind of a subplot with a relationship and that distancing that's happening there. Just was interested in did the pandemic get you hunkered down writing more, or is it how did it I guess impact, if it did, this very fine book you've given us?
Yeah, well, thank goodness I had this book to work on it partway through the pandemic, you know. But you know, I found actually there were two things working, but I found the pandemic kind of stumped me. I wasn't writing much for a good chunk of it. I couldn't seem to get writing poetry, especially like there were some invitations to contribute to pandemic anthologies. I couldn't sit down and write a pandemic poem or whatever, you know. So I felt kind of, I don't know, I was fallow or something. But then strangely enough, like normally I have a very regular practice of writing every day in the mornings, first thing, more or less. And in the pandemic, that all went to pot. Well, I wasn't using pot, but
Well,
that
it's
all,
legal now.
yeah, it's legal now, but I wasn't using it anyway. But no, I was having a real problem, but there were a few impulses that hit me, and that story you referred to in Paris, a fountain. Well, it grew from a combination of things. I reread Samuel Beckett's biography. Was it Deidre Bear, I think, yeah. And Beckett has been a big influence on me ever since I saw Waiting for Godot in whatever year that was, 1967 or something. And this whole notion, I don't even know how that story came together. Like, it was a relationship, Samuel Beckett turning up in Saskatoon, directing his play, and it was pandemic. I don't know. It just all sort of came together. It is kind of meta, that novel, but I brought him back to life, which was really fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I really enjoyed it, and the pandemic was horrible, but it also felt like kind of this whole kind of extended. I mean, some kind of Dadaist nightmare or something like that. So if anyone could take a pandemic and turn it into something creative, boundary pushing creative, you could. So kudos to you on that story as well. And I had pages of questions, but I'm pretty sure we're out of time, and I so appreciate everyone for joining us, and Radiant Press for just the good work that you do. Deborah and John, my gosh, the books that you guys are turning out. We need you. We need you, and you work so hard for writers. Thank you. And Steve, it's been years, and I've followed your career always with interest, and you're always on the cutting edge. And I hope everyone will buy Steve's new book and read it and enjoy it as much as I did. So thank you very much. And Steve, do you have any last words?
Yes, thank you. I would like to just say a few thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jeanette. I really enjoyed our conversation. I remember you on the baseball diamond at Sage Hill and many other occasions on which we've crossed paths. And it's always delightful. And this is fun. Thank you for this.
It was fun for me too.
Yeah, and I do want to thank, as you have done, John Kennedy and Deborah Bell, the shining magicians behind the scenes at Radiant Press, for having faith in my work and bringing it into view. I do have to give a nod to my editor, Dave Margoshes, for his astute input and encouragement along the way. He was terrific to work with, and my gratitude to everyone who's tuned into this. May you all glimmer and glow.